Hi, this is a special presentation called A Proposal to the Hebrew Nation. I'm Kimberly Rogers, and you're listening to a presentation by themessianicmessage.com, themessianicmessage.com. I ask that you be a Berean and verify everything that I say. And now, let's say a word of prayer. Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, Creator of all things. We thank you and praise you, and we know that you are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our forefathers. I ask that your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven and in our lives, Abba. I just pray for the people of your nation, for you to continue working with us, protecting us, providing for us, and trying to restore us. In the name of Yeshua, Amen. Okay, well, we have problems in the Hebrew roots community that fly like bullets. We've got some attacks by brethren upon one another in the Hebrew roots community that are not only hurting our people, they're literally killing this community. And one of the issues is the calendar. Another issue is name pronunciation. You know, every time I think that one is going to die, I get a phone call from somebody telling me I'm saying the name wrong. And then we have the color of blue in the tsitsiot, and even the length, you know, how long are your tsitsiot supposed to be, and, you know, how are you supposed to tie them, and all that kind of stuff. And then we have fights going on over group leadership and leadership styles. And, you know, but our biggest and ever burgeoning problem is this calendar. Well, I want to bring to your attention the fact that Torah applies to everyone equally, to Hebrews and Gentiles alike. So if this is so, why is it that we cannot come to an agreement on these disputed issues? Well, I want to present something for you to consider. And it's going to come out of Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8. That's where we're going to start. And it says, "If there arise a matter too hard for you in judgment between blood and blood," that's, you know, between family members, between plea and plea, you know, that's two people who are pleading two different sides of a case, and between stroke and stroke, that means it's a contractual thing, being matters of controversy. Oh my, that is something that we have going on in the Hebrew roots movement today. Controversy. Being matters of controversy within your gates, then you shall arise and go to the place which the Lord your God shall choose, and you shall come to the priests, the Levites, and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire, and they shall show you the sentence of judgment. And you shall do according to the sentence which they of that place, which the Lord shall choose to show you, and you shall observe to do according to all that they inform you. By the way, where is it that the Lord shall choose to show you? Well, it's, of course, we understand today, it is Jerusalem. According to the sentence of the law, which they shall teach you. According to the sentence of the law, which the priests from the line of Levi, that's the line of Aaron, and the judge, according to what they shall teach you, and according to the judgment which they shall tell you, you shall do. You shall not decline from the sentence which they shall show you, to the right hand nor to the left. Now, you know, when the Lord said to obey the Torah, he said, do not go to the right hand or to the left. Stay straight, you know. So right here, he's telling us that this becomes part of the Torah law. Whatever the priests from the line of Aaron and the judge shall tell you, that is then to become part of the law. And the man that will do presumptuously and will not hearken to the priest that stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or to the judge, even that man shall die, and you shall put away the evil from Israel. So, if you've got somebody doing presumptuously, what is that word there, presumptuously, in verse 12? It is Strong's 2087. And the word is zadon, and it's to have arrogance or to, have pride. So, if the man is arrogant and refuses to do it, then you need to put that evil away from Israel. And in verse 13 it says, and all the people shall hear. You see, this judgment is not going to be just for the ones that are standing there in front of the priests or in front of the judge. You see, this judgment, this decree that is made, is going to apply to all the people all throughout the land. That's why it becomes part of the law. And all the people shall hear and fear and do no more presumptuously. Well, that word there, presumptuously, is a different word. And it means to seethe. So in other words, you're not supposed to get upset about it. It's not supposed to make you seethe or boil. And you're not supposed to be insolent about it, you see. You're not supposed to be presumptuous. You're just supposed to do it. So we have presumptuously being translated into English, but those are two different Hebrew words with one English word being used. So what this is telling us is that when the priests and the judges make a decree, it is arrogant and insolent to disobey. Now in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 13, it says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate. So we're to put this evil outside the land, away from us, if people refuse to be obedient to the decrees that the priests and the judges have made. Now, this teaching is based on Shoftim, starting there in chapter 17, verse 8. Now, let's take a look at the structure of the judiciary, because this judiciary structure got started somewhere. Actually, it got started back there in Exodus chapter 18:13, where it says, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning to the evening. When they have a matter, they come to me, he said to Jethro. I'm going to paraphrase because he's talking to Jethro here. And he says, I judge between one another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. So Moses was sitting in his seat to judge. You know, Yeshua talked about Moses' seat. Well, see, that's referring back here to Moses sitting to judge the people. Yitro, his father-in-law, said to him, what are you doing to yourself? This is way too much for you to handle by yourself. Get yourself some upright fellas to help you do this. And, what Moses was telling Yitro is that when they have a matter, they come to me, and I judge between them, and I make them to know the statutes of God and his laws. But then we get to Deuteronomy 16, verse 18, which is also in the Shoftim Torah portion. And it says that judges and officers shall you make in all your gates, which the Lord your God gives you throughout your tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. So, starting from the time of Moses sitting there when Yitro was still in the camp, we have had a judiciary, a functioning judiciary. And the Lord has said, now when you go into the land, in all of your gates, have judges and officers there to judge the people with just judgment. And so we can see here the start of the judiciary and its structure. Now, kings rule over judges because of the hierarchy of the vassal arrangement, that the king is the vassal to the Lord, and then judges fall under that. And so, judges not only rule over the kings, the kings not only rule over the judges, but also kings may, make judgments. Deuteronomy 17:14 says, "When you are come to the land which the Lord your God gives you, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me." Right there, the Lord is talking about when He's going to set a king over the people. And let's go and look further at Deuteronomy Deuteronomy 17:14, and I'm going to get this here in just a second. Deuteronomy 17. Hang on with me. He says in verse 15 there, I'm going to make that fit in the space there if I can. Oh, come on, computer. Sometimes technology just doesn't want to do what you want it to do. And so I'm going to move this over there, and then you can see. You will certainly set a king over you that God will choose from among your relatives. But you must not place a foreign king over you. Okay, you see that there so here in chapter 17, verse 14, he says, I will appoint a king. That's what you're saying. I will appoint a king over me like all the nations around thee. But the Lord is saying, no, you will set a king over you that I will choose from among your relatives. And the reason for this, for the Lord choosing this as He does, is because we choose the judges. The priesthood is a generational succession, and the king is chosen by the Lord. And so we know then that the judicial structure includes kings who can rule over judges. And by the way, later on we're going to find that these priests and judges actually form councils to the kings. I'm going to show you those scriptures. And that, when we have the priests in place, that they are then a generational succession. So we know from Scripture that kings and governors both acted as judges sometimes. We had Solomon who did that. You remember that with the famous story about the 2 women and the 1 baby. And then we have Nehemiah, and I'm going to show you that Scripture a little bit later on, where he acted as a judge and made a decree that everyone must follow. And also we're going to see that Yeshua upheld the structure, this judiciary structure that included something called the Great Council. It also was called the Sanhedrin. And so we have Yeshua saying in Matthew 23, then spake Yeshua to the multitude and to the disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but don't do after their works, for they say and do not. So What he's not saying there, which is what most people say, is, don't do what, Moses said to do. That's not what that says there. And another interpretation that I've heard about this is that what it says there is, observe what they tell you to observe as long as it agrees with the Torah. No, that's not what it says there either. It says, all that they bid you to observe, that observe and do. And by the way, those two words, observe and do, are used throughout the Torah as what we're supposed to do with the commandments. Now, the Sanhedrin, also known as the Great Council, is actually, the Sanhedrin is actually a Greek word, synedrion, meaning sitting together. Now, this name possibly was adopted during the Greek captivity before the Roman invasion, during the time of Maccabees. Antiochus, of course, the Greeks called this Synedrion also a Senate. The Great Synedrion, or Great Sanhedrin, that we're talking about today is the one that was at Jerusalem. Now, there were other lesser councils that were called Sanhedrin, because the Lord said, you put officers and judges in your gates, in all your gates. So whatever town you were in, there was a council there. And in fact, there were 71 counselors, priests, and judges on the Great Sanhedrin Council at Jerusalem, and 23 at the lesser, the local areas there. Now, the use of this Great Sanhedrin began to develop when the Jews returned from Babylon. Let's go to Ezra and take a look at the first council after the return from Babylon. Ezra made a decree, and it said, they made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the children of the captivity that they should gather themselves together to Jerusalem. You see, some of them had come and they had been building the house, and the king of Babylon had let them come back to the land, but some of the Jews were not leaving. I mean, it's just the same problem we have today, right? Where, they're trying to establish the Jewish nation over there in Israel. We got more Jews outside the land than we have in the land. And in verse 8 it says, and that whosoever would not come within 3 days, I'm giving you 3 days, according to the counsel of the princes and the elders, all his substance should be forfeited, and himself separated from the congregation of those that had been carried away. So we see now that we have a decree from the Great Council, the Sanhedrin, as it would later be called, regarding the Jews that would not come back from their exile in Babylon. But there were other places in the scriptures mentioning the councils before Ezra here in the return from Babylon, before the diaspora. In 1 Kings 12:8 it says, but he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. So here we have a council of old men and young men. Now, what this is not talking about it as a group, but Rehoboam is deciding how to handle the revolt, the tax revolt of the house of Israel, and he has around him a council, C-O-N-C-I-L, council, and he gets counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L, of the old men and the young men, you see. and spoke to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. So this is Rehoboam speaking here, talking about what he's going to do to the house of Israel. And then we have this same passage again in 2 Chronicles, in chapter 10, verse 6, where it says, And King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men that had stood before Solomon his father. You see, they are what you call let me type it in here, a council. Okay, these men that stood with his father while he yet lived. And saying, What counsel, that's advice, give you me to return answer to this people? And in verse 8 it says, But he forsook the counsel which the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men, as we saw in 1 Kings there. And again in chapter 10, verse 13, it says, The king answered roughly, and King Rehoboam forsook the counsel of the old men. And now we have in 2 Chronicles chapter 25:16, And it came to pass, as he talked with him, that the king said to him, Are you made of the king's counsel? Forbear, why should you be smitten? Then the prophet forbare and said, I knew that God has determined to destroy you because you have done this, and have not hearkened to my counsel, my advice. And so we see here that even prophets at some point are part of a council that gives counsel, advice, to the king and to people in the king's court. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 2, it says, For the king had taken counsel and his princes and all the congregation in Jerusalem to keep the Passover in the 2nd month. So he consulted a council, and they counseled him to keep the Passover in the 2nd month. Isaiah 1:26 says, And I will restore your judges at the first, and your counselors. And we can say counselors, okay, being a panel of people, as at the beginning. Afterward, you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. You see, so Isaiah is telling us that there's coming a time when this judicial structure is going to be set up again, and that we are going to be required to listen to their decrees, their judgments, whatsoever they bid us to observe, as it says back there in Shoftim chapter 17, starting at verse 8. Why do I say that's going to be the case again in the kingdom? Because the Lord is going to restore all things. He didn't put those words there in Deuteronomy for us to just, now we're in the kingdom, we don't have to do that. We're going to do all that stuff in the kingdom. Now, I want to take you to Nehemiah. Nehemiah was governor in Judea, and he used his magistrate authority to rule on how the people were supposed to keep the Shabbat. In Nehemiah chapter 13, starting at verse 17, he says, Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said to them, What evil thing is this that you do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. You know, we understand that the Jews have a tradition that before sundown, about 18 minutes before sundown, they actually start the Sabbath. That tradition is based upon what happened here, because Nehemiah was seeing that the people were defiling the Sabbath. They were continuing their commerce on the Sabbath and well after the dark, and so he said, I'm going to make this decree. And so when it begins to be dark before the Sabbath, that's when the Sabbath starts. So you see, there is a decree that, when I first got into the Hebrew Roots community years ago, people used to ask me, when does the Shabbat start? Well, it starts, according to Nehemiah, when the gates of Jerusalem begin to be dark. And that is a principle that we can apply out here in the exile in order to show our Father that we are indeed interested in doing all that we are able to do, because there's so much in the Torah that we are not able to do. Now, let's get back to the Sanhedrin. Contrary to what you may think, actually, the Sanhedrin never totally disbanded. In 358 AD, it was said that they disbanded, but they did continue to operate past that. The Jews continued with that Sanhedrin in various forms well after the destruction of the temple. The religious Sanhedrin was reconvened in Yabneh, and became the supreme political instrument for all the Jews of the Roman Empire. When Judea was destroyed as a result of the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Sanhedrin then moved to Galilee. So, for a time after 70 AD, the Sanhedrin was actually in Galilee. And then at some point in the history, Romans withdrew their recognition of the Sanhedrin Council, and you can read more about that in the Encyclopedia Judaica in an article titled Sanhedrin. The reason the Romans withdrew their recognition of the Sanhedrin Council in Galilee was because they were getting ready to do a huge persecution against the Jews. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't very long after that all the Jews were driven from the land, and Jews who tried to return to the land were actually killed. Now, as I said, this great Sanhedrin Council continued in the form of what was called a Great Beit Din. During the Middle Ages, this Great Beit Din began to uphold the oral or Talmudic law. The Talmud is a written oral law. It was first, an oral law, and then later, during the Middle Ages, the rabbis began to write it down so that it's now a written oral law. And it is a collection of rabbinic opinions, interpretations, and discussions that form Judaism's doctrines. And so we can learn from some of those things, but this does not have the weight of the Sanhedrin or the Great Council at Jerusalem. Now, I want to show you another area besides in the judging between people, between blood and blood, plea and plea, and stroke and stroke, where the priests had authority to make decrees that became written into the law of Moses. I know that everybody is going to just be shocked to learn that, because the Lord said, didn't he say, don't add to the Torah or diminish from it? Yet he gave authority to the people who were in charge to actually make decrees regarding how to do the Torah instructions. The reason for that is because he gives us an instruction, a commandment, but then he doesn't tell us how. And so it is the how, the means to and the way to get things accomplished that the priests have authority over. And so we have in the temple service the greatest example of how the priests had authority to make decrees, because many of the procedures performed in the temple and at temple services are not specified in the Torah. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples. For instance, in the mincha instructions, that mincha means offering. In Leviticus 2:4 it says, "And if you bring an oblation of a meat offering baked in the oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil." Well, if you go and you look at the temple instructions for just one type of mincha offering, you get instructions on how to put the oil in a vessel, how to add the flour, how to mix with the additional oil, how to pour the remainder of the oil, putting it on the lavona, touching the mizbeach, separating part of the mixture, how to sanctify the komets, sanctifying the lavona, carrying to the mizbeach, salting it, burning it, and eating the remainder. Even has instructions from the temple period. Now, I got this information from an article that Rico Cortez had on his website called The Korban Mincha, a pictorial guide to the Korban Mincha. Now, I said that was just one of the minchas, and there are actually 13 minchas for temple service, and each one has its own set of instructions. Now, I ask you, does the Torah list all of the details of how to do these minchas properly? No, it doesn't. Now, the priests did a mikvah. This is another example of how we can see that the priests had authority to make decrees that became part of the instruction of Torah. It says, each day before the Kohanim could enter the Azarah, they were required to immerse themselves in a mikvah. Then they had to wash their hands and feet with water from the kior. The kior was a copper vessel with spouts. Originally, it had 2 spouts. Later, 10 more spouts were added. Standing next to one of the spouts, the Kohanim would place his hands on his feet, and while the water was flowing, he would gently rub his feet with his hands. And optionally, the Kohen could use a vessel containing water from the kior. This was the method used by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So this came from another one of Rico's articles regarding Yom Kippur. Now, you know, we have instruction in the Torah that says, you know, the priests are to wash, to mikvah, but it doesn't give all these huge number of instructions, you see. So these were things that the priests deemed necessary to decree or to add in order for the temple service to go properly. Now, are all those instructions in the Torah? Well, here it is in Exodus 29 verse 4, where it says, "And Aaron and his sons you shall bring to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall wash them with water." That's the entire instruction that the Lord gave to Moses. And guess what? That instruction there was for the priestly inauguration. But the Kohen made this a regulation for daily entrances into the temple. Now, these are just two examples of the detailed instructions for temple service that grew out of the Torah's simple instructions. Yet, this is very important. Yehovah never commented anywhere in Scripture that their procedures and ceremonies were incorrect. Yehovah only scolded them about the conditions of their hearts. He never said, well, you're not laying that animal up on the altar right, or you're not washing yourself right, or you're not, mixing that flour and oil together right. No, he said, your heart is not towards me. Therefore, your offerings and your ceremonies are just, not up to my standard because your heart. It wasn't because of the procedures and ceremonies that they had created. Those were actually good. It was their heart that mattered, you see. And so, based on Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 to 12, priests and judges have the authority and the right to reach a verdict and enter a decree that becomes part of the law, and the people are instructed to obey. The people must obey what those who sit in Moses' seat say because the Lord said so. Now, how do I know that? Well, Yeshua obeyed the council decrees. He obeyed the calendar. He never made any speculation about calendar origins or said, you're following Hillel's, calendar and you're not doing it right. He never said that he wasn't going to do what they said. He just went along and did the feasts at the time when the Hillel calendar, which was a calendar based on observation and calculation at the time, said that the feasts were supposed to be done. And then in 358 AD, the Sanhedrin, which was then in the diaspora, decreed to calculate the calendar because they were no longer allowed in Jerusalem or in Israel to observe it. So they solidified the calendar that was used during Yeshua's time into a calculated calendar where observation would not be required. Now, hang in here with me. Please don't run away because this is going to get very much more interesting. The Sanhedrin, or Supreme Court of the main body of Judah, that announced the days of the months of the year, hence when the 14th of Nisan would be, and the feasts of the 7th month, Yeshua did not argue with them over when the new month days would be announced, nor did the New Testament Church of God, the assembly of Yehovah during the first century, or during any century thereafter. This calendar issue is a new thing with the Hebrew roots community down here at the end of days, which should tell you something about, its origins, the dispute, the origins of the dispute. The calculated calendar was an important innovation that made it possible for the house of Judah to remain intact. Look, the Jews did two things. I'm going to talk about something else that they did later on that caused them to stay intact as a nation in exile. This has never happened before. But this calculated calendar was that unique and important innovation that made it possible for that to happen. So regardless of the calendar that was used and its origins, whether it came out of Babylon? Yes, it did. Was it equinox? No, it wasn't. Was it observed? Yes. Was it an Enoch calendar? No. Was it the ancient Egyptian calendar that Moses followed? No. Regardless, though, of what the calendar was that was what Yeshua followed, it instructed us, we are instructed to do the same as Yeshua, who followed that observed, then calculated calendar that was the Hillel calendar during his time. Now we're going to go back to what we read earlier, which is Matthew 23, starting at verse 1. Then spoke Yeshua to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But don't do after their works, for they say and do not. So in other words, they were making decrees, but they were not following their own decrees. You see? Now, we have to make the distinction between what is a decree and what is tradition. For instance, there was a tradition. The Bible tells us it was tradition to, observe the washing of pots and cups and all that kind of stuff, Those were traditions. They were not decrees. So we have to get a little bit smart about this and start to study this. Peter said we need to study to show ourselves approved. Well, we need to stop just following blindly what other people say. They say something, and then we go out on the web and we try to prove what they say is correct because it appeals to us. We need to stop that attitude. We need to go into the scripture and see what actually was done, and that's what I've tried to do here, to show you that there's a difference between the decrees of the Great Council, the Sanhedrin, and the traditions that were put forth by the rabbis and the teachers. But in the Hebrew roots community today, we have a prejudice against that council. And guess where it comes from? Matthew 5:22 says, But I say to you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Rakah, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, You fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. But look at that. The council is something that we can be in danger of. You see, the Lord is going to hold us accountable to the council decrees. And not only can we be in danger before the Lord regarding the council decrees, but we can actually be in danger before the council if they tell us something and we don't do it. So that is one way that we have a prejudice against the council, because we just don't want to have something else that we have to be accountable to, see? So then we talk about in Matthew 12:14, it says, Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. And that right there in Matthew 12:14 is the bigger reason that we have a prejudice against that council. Now let's go to Matthew 26:59. It says, Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Yeshua to put him to death. And then the council was, trying to persecute the apostles. Acts 5, verse 41. And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. So before the council, they were made to suffer, you see. And in Acts 6:12 it says, And they stirred up the people. Who did? The council. And the elders and the scribes, and came upon him and caught him and brought him to the council. Here we're talking about one of our brothers that was stoned, and it was Stephen. Let's go over to Acts Um, chapter 6, see here, Acts 6, and what is verse 12? Okay, so we're going to go down to verse 12. And so in verse 5 it says, this suggestion pleased the whole group, so they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicolaus, a Gentile convert to Judaism from Antioch. They had these men stand before the apostles who prayed and laid their hands on them, so the word of God continued to spread. And so now you go down here to verse 12, and you can see here in verse 9, where it says, some men who belonged to the synagogue of the freedmen, as it was called, as well as some Cyrenians, Alexandrians, and men from Cilicia and Asia stood up and began to debate with Stephen. See, now right here we're beginning to see that we've got a council that might not be on the up and up yet. The Lord has a remedy for that. Hang in here with me. But they could neither refute the wisdom nor withstand the spirit by which he kept speaking. So they secretly got some men to say, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God. And those guys up here in verse 9, stirred up the people. Then they rushed at Stephen, you see. So that was what was going on there. So here we have another reason for the prejudice against the council. And now we have also confusion about the council. Okay, so we must not, as I said earlier, confuse tradition with council decrees. But we do need to remember who still has the scepter to this day. Now, scepter refers to a ruler. Well, guess what? Judah still has the scepter, and he's going to have it until Messiah comes. It says here in Genesis 49, verse 8, Judah, you art he whom your brethren shall praise. Your hand shall be in the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you are gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Oh, and that phrase right there, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be, oh, that's going to be very important later on in this teaching. So what we see here is that Judah still has the scepter, and so perhaps what Judah does is maybe what we should be doing if we can verify that what Judah is doing is a decree from the Great Council. Now, the Jewish leaders, I got this online, Jewish leaders started to create the Torah portions while they were in Babylon during the 6th century BCE, and Ezra became the first one to read the Torah in public after the Babylonian exile. There it says in Nehemiah chapter 8. It was those Torah portions that helped the house of Judah to be united during the Babylonian captivity and after their dispersion 2,000 years ago. And that the Torah portions have perhaps been among the most significant reasons, along with the Hillel II calendar that came out in 358 AD, as to the reason why the house of Judah defied all historical precedents, allowing them to return to become a nation once more. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Ephraim and the house of Judah both willingly accept the Torah portion divisions, even though the Sanhedrin did not decree them. The Torah portion divisions just came out of, their angst in Babylon. It's actually, the Torah portions are a tradition. They're not a decree. Yet, the house of Israel, house of Ephraim, will willingly accept the Torah portion divisions. We follow them faithfully along with the Jews every year. Okay? And in fact, Ephraim, the house of Israel, adopts many Jewish traditions, which is, like the lighting of the candles, women covering their heads, saying the Kol Nidre at Yom Kippur, just lots of things that the Jews do that we have accepted. Well, then I have to ask you, why then would it be too difficult for us to just accept a scriptural commanded decree, as was instructed to Moses in Shoftim, to follow the decrees laid out by the priests and the judges of the council, the great council, the Sanhedrin? Why is that so difficult? Well, Ephraim is still in exile. So is Judah, actually. We have the land of Israel over there, and some Jews are over there. But the truth of it is, the houses have not been restored, and most of Jacob is still in exile. But one of the things that happens when you are in exile is you lose your identity, unless you are smart enough to make a calendar to keep the feasts together wherever you are on the planet, and smart enough to figure out how to read the scriptures together regardless of where you are on the planet. See, Ephraim was not interested enough in keeping the commandments. No, they were in rebellion, and they got made to go into exile. Now, we should not expect, and in fact we know that the identity of Ephraim is kind of still out there. We don't really know who is who in the house of Israel yet. Okay? But the other thing, besides losing our identity, is that we have lost the ruling body that was given to us, that was designed to settle our difficult disputes. The house of Israel, or house of Ephraim, does not have the authority to create Beit Dins. Why is that? Well, because that's something for in the land, something within your gates when you're in the land. I know that people will say, well, they had this out there in the wilderness. Yes, they did, but they were a community going into the land. We've been out of the land for 2,700 years. Yes, we're getting ready to go into the land, but we don't have the scepter. Judah has the scepter. Therefore, Judah has the authority to create the Beit Din. And by the way, they have reinstituted the Sanhedrin, although, again, they don't recognize Ephraim. The councils were comprised of Aaronic priests and elected judges. Now, right now, only the house of Judah has any form of government that can elect judges, but neither house has the Aaronic priesthood. So even though in the land over there they are saying that, we have this Sanhedrin now again, they don't really have all the authority that they're supposed to have, because they don't have the priests and the judges. You see, the commandment is you've got to have the priests and the judges. And so Ephraim and Judah both don't really have any kind of authority when it comes to Sanhedrins, great councils, or Beit Dins. Oh, and by the way, we're having so much trouble, trying to get just people to be on the same page and just to put down the arguments and just be united as a whole house. What makes anybody think that they'd ever be able to create a Beit Din that anybody in Ephraim would listen to? We are so rebellious that we would never submit to that authority. That's one of the problems, is that we have rebellion against the Great Council. Hebrew roots believers are just like the rebels of their ancestors in the house of Israel. Just like them, stiff-necked. We pick and choose what we want to follow, which is not the best strategy. We argue over things that we don't even have authority to argue over. Let me explain something. It's better to choose to just do the Torah commandments and not to argue over that. Now let's go back to Deuteronomy 17 verse 8 for a minute. If there arise a matter too hard for you in judgment between blood and blood, between plea and plea, and between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within your gates, see, the lack of our ability to establish a Beit Din, along with the fact that the house of Israel is still in exile without a governing body, prevents us from settling the disputes that happen among the brethren. Now, earlier, when I first started this teaching, I said I was calling it a proposal to the Hebrew nation, and here's my proposal. Because there existed a body whose decrees are still legitimate today, because, the Torah never goes away, the decrees prior to the Jewish expulsion from Israel should be studied for their scriptural propriety. Like I said, we're supposed to make sure that we're not following traditions necessarily. So we need to make sure that they were actually given as a part of the scripture, these decrees that they made. And that we need to defer to some other people regarding known issues. One of those known issues is the calendar. My proposal is that we begin to defer to the Great Council, to the Sanhedrin's authority, to the same authority that Yeshua himself deferred to. And that regarding personal disputes, that we just might have to defer to Yeshua, wait for that to happen when Yeshua comes during the kingdom. We're going to have to learn to forgive and stop holding grudges. And even though we have feelings of hatred towards the other person, we're just going to have to fake it until we make it. We're just going to have to act like we love them, despite those hateful emotions that we feel inside ourselves. Paul had something to say about that. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1, he says, "Think of us as servants of the Messiah and as servant managers entrusted with God's secrets. Now, it is required of servant managers that each one should prove to be trustworthy. It is a very small thing to me that I should be examined by you, or by any human court. In fact, I don't even evaluate myself. For my conscience is clear, but that does not vindicate me. It is the Lord who examines me. Therefore, stop judging prematurely before the Lord comes. For he will bring to light what is now hidden in darkness and reveal the motives of our hearts. Then each person will receive his praise from God." See, all these personal disputes of people, saying, "Oh, you don't have the right to do that in our congregation." This other person over here goes, "You wronged me. You must pay. You must pay." Well, we don't have the right to make those demands. The best that we can do is to stop judging prematurely before the Lord comes. Now, in John chapter 7, starting at verse 23, it says, "If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man perfectly well on the Sabbath?" See, Yeshua is going to tell him here, stop judging by appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. Now, I just told you what Paul said here. He said, stop judging prematurely. What does prematurely mean? It means before the Lord comes. Stop judging. Start loving. But yet, we are commanded to judge with righteous judgment. You see that? Then some of the people of Jerusalem began saying, "This is the man they are trying to kill, isn't it?" And then in Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 and 20, we read that he said, "You will know them by their fruit. Grapes aren't gathered from thorns or figs from thistles, are they? So by their fruit you will know them. Having judged, then, are we permitted to be unkind? Are we permitted to reject someone because based on our own judgment we think, well, that person doesn't have, the right kind of fruit. That person doesn't, maybe their fruit has a little blemish on it or something. And so rather than, look for a way to repair the fruit, we just toss it out. Do we have the right to reject someone based on our judgment? May we just go ahead and slander someone that we have personally judged? If not, why not? Well, it's because there is a proper protocol laid out in the Torah that must be followed, and part of that process requires this council of priests and judges. You have to have the council of priests and judges in place, or the councils of priests and judges in your own gates don't matter. You have to be able to. Yehovah said that if your matter is too hard for you where you are locally, you have to go to Jerusalem to the priests and the judge there, you see. So, therefore, stop judging prematurely before the Lord comes. You see, that's what we need to do. We need to submit to the higher authority, and we need to stop making ourselves to be judges and executioners as well. The greater issue in this calendar thing and with the name and the personal disputes that we get into and all about the tsitsiot and all of that, the greater issue is our love. It is our loyalty to one another despite our personal feelings towards someone who we believe has wrongly hurt us. Oh, and by the way, loyalty is going to be a very big issue because with the viciousness that is on the rise in the Hebrew roots community, I'm telling you that it's not going to be just your biological family. It's not going to be just your Christian brethren. It's going to be your Hebrew brethren who are going to turn you into the beast system to have you killed. They're going to say, you did me wrong in this deal. Or they're going to say, you had no right to question my authority. Or they're going to say, you're on the wrong calendar. Your tsitsiot are too long or too short. You don't have enough knots. You have too many knots. They're not tied right. The blue is the wrong color. Therefore, I'm going to do God a favor and I'm just going to have you killed. I'm telling you, people, that is what is coming down the pike. We're going to see a time when our Hebrew brethren are going to seek the death penalty that they don't have the right to impugn. But it's coming because I have seen just in the last year a huge increase in the viciousness, the cruelty, the hatred that some brethren have toward others, because they don't have the ability to forgive. They don't have the ability to submit to authority, and especially to a Sanhedrin council that before 70 AD said this is the calendar. There's going to be a lot of people who are not going to submit to that. They don't understand that unity is the most important issue for the Hebrew roots community at the end of days. Not what calendar you're on, not how you say the name, not how you wear your tsitsiot. Unity. John 17:11 says, "And now I am no more in the world, but these are in the world, and I come to you. Holy Father, keep through your own name. Keep through your own name those whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are." Let's go to Psalm 133 and start at verse 1. David said, "Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." Let me explain something to you about the Torah. The Torah is a law book of actions and behaviors. There are no doctrines, there are no opinions, there are no interpretations in the Torah. We add those. We add those. And by the way, what the priests and the judges add as far as instructions to the Torah commandments are not doctrines and interpretations. Once they become a decree, they're part of the instructions. So there's no doctrines or opinions or interpretations found in there. So we're just going to have to get happy to perform the actions and behaviors and leave our interpretations and opinions and doctrines to Yeshua during the millennial kingdom. Oh, and by the way, know this, and I'm going to type this little word right down in here. Whoops, let me get it. Crime. See that word there? That's what a sin is. Sin equals what you commit against Torah. See that word sin there? That's an old English word, and it really just means to be guilty. Okay? It doesn't really mean anything to us in modern times, but we understand the word crime. So let me ask you something about the laws of the United States. When you're driving down the highway and the speed limit is 35 miles an hour, but you're going 45, what's happening? Are you violating an opinion, an interpretation, or a doctrine of the laws of the highway of the United States? Or are you violating a behavior, an action that the people who oversee the roadways want you to observe? What do they call it when you don't observe it? They call it a crime. And crime comes in various levels, all the way up from like misdemeanors to, first, second, and degrees, and treachery, you see. So I think another part of this proposal should be that we should start to think of our transgressions against the Torah as crimes and stop trying to use the old English word that doesn't mean anything to us today. And by the way, there are dozens of sins, crimes listed in the Torah, you see, that, we put one English word on all of those different things. And so we need to start to study what those are and break them out and what they mean and decide that we're not going to commit those crimes. Now, I'm going to make a statement here, and you are probably not going to well, I'm not going to say you're probably not going to like it. Some of you will and some of you won't. The house of Judah will be joined by the house of Ephraim. You remember earlier when I said that everything will be restored back to Ephraim, with, or back to Judah with Ephraim following up behind. And I said, hang on to that thought. I don't know if I could even find it now. Let me see here. Let's go back up there and see if we can find that, where I said that. Okay, it's way back up there. Let me see. Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it, because I don't remember. I don't remember where it was. It was Isaiah was saying, let me hang on here while I go to Isaiah. And no, it's not that. So find next. Here we go. I think this is it. And I will restore your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. I don't know, was that it? Well, whatever it was, I said hang on to that thought, because we were going to see that Ephraim is going to join Judah. And let me take you to the scripture that shows that Ephraim is going to join Judah in the end of days. Luke 15, starting at verse 11. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. And he divided them to his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine ate, and no man gave to him. And when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no more worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet. And oh, by the way, let me explain something that since studying with Rico Cortez, the ancient Near East context of, the understanding that the Hebrews, the Israelites had back then, right there, that's covenant language. The robe, the ring, and the shoes are all part of the covenant language. And bring here the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and be married. For this my son was dead. He said, you're going to be not my people. And now is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother is come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and entreated him. Now see, look. Judah is angry, and in fact, he is angry still at Ephraim. Just try to talk with some Jews sometime about, being the house of Israel. You're not going to get very far. Judah lived there, but he would not go in, see? So his father had to come out of the house and ask him to come in. And he, answering, said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve you, neither transgressed I at any time your commandment. Oh, well, that's debatable. And yet you never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as your son has come, which has devoured your living with harlots, you have killed for him the fatted calf. And he said to him, Son, you are ever with me. Those are very important words. Judah, you have always been with me. See, Judah, you have always been with me, and all that I have is yours. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and it is found. So you see, Ephraim comes home, but you know who's already there? Judah. Judah is already in relationship and working in the field called the world. And in fact, Judah has never been out of relationship with the Father. Judah was never declared not my people, you see. He says there in Luke 15:29, and he, answering, said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee. See, he's been serving the Father all along. Why did they go into exile? Well, because, they committed sins, but they committed crimes. Let me correct my language. They committed crimes against the Torah, but against the law. But let's be clear about this. The Lord never said of the house of Judah, You are not my people. The Lord said that of the house of Israel. Now, in the kingdom, will Yeshua uphold Judah's decrees? No, some of them, possibly. But the reason is because Yeshua is coming to restore all things, you see. And there will be more on this in just a minute. The exiles of the houses of Judah and Israel were complete at 70 A.D. At 70 A.D., the whole house of Jacob was out of the land of Israel. Now, I know that some Jews were managed to stay there and live in Galilee and so forth. Eventually, it came to a point where there were no Hebrews, no Israelite, no Jacobites in the land whatsoever, and if they came back, they got killed. So, decrees made after 70 AD, after that time that occurred in the final dispersion that has lasted for 2,000 years, are not necessarily to be followed. Although the first councils occurred in the wilderness before the Hebrews possessed Israel, we have to understand that there was already a government structure in place for them in the wilderness that we do not have today. Therefore, since the government of Israel was dismantled, it no longer has authority. And again, see, I said I was going to do more on this. Here's the thing. The restoration. Two things are required for the government of Israel, the Commonwealth of Israel, to have full authority now. And that is that the whole house of Jacob has to be in the land, and the exile has to be ending, and there have to be priests and judges in there. Now, we don't have the priests. The modern Sanhedrin is not enough, and as I said before, it does not recognize Ephraim. But we do have the decrees that they did make before they were thrown out of the land in 70 AD. And so we need to go back and look at those, research them out, and figure out, whether or not we're going to submit to the authority that the Lord Himself put in place. Now, today's Sanhedrin is preparing to join the Muslims and will accept their Mahdi. This is another reason that we don't want to get involved with today's modern Sanhedrin. According to Walid Shobat, in his article called Group Claiming to be Israel Sanhedrin Ready to Accept Islamic Mahdi, we find out that possibly, they're going to lead Israel down the merry path there. Here's another thing to consider. Israel entered into a covenant with the Islamic demon deity on July 31st, 2013. That was arranged by the United States. Israel, the Palestinians, and the United States are now in covenant together with their Islamic demon deity. That means that the current Sanhedrin in Israel is now disqualified from presiding over Jehovah's people. So there again, we're taken back to whatever happened before 70 AD, like Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 13, where he talks about this is when Sabbath starts. It starts when the gates start to get long, when the shadows get long. If we're interested in showing the Lord that we want to keep His commandments and submit to the authority of those that He put over us, then, we'll look at the shadows and start before dark. You know what I'm saying? Now let's go to Matthew 24:26, because here he said, Wherefore, if they shall say to you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. If the Sanhedrin is getting ready to announce the Mahdi along with the Muslims, we're not to pay attention to that, because the Muslims claim that their Messiah is in the desert, and they also claim that he is in secret chambers. And do you think that Yeshua knew that this was going to happen way back then? I think he's much smarter than we are, and so he knew way back then. Okay, so if Israel's modern Sanhedrin makes a declaration regarding the Mahdi, ignore it. Oh, by the way, there might be some people who would not ignore this modern Sanhedrin, but because you are studied up on this, you will know about it. Now, I've said not to follow any decrees after 70 AD. I believe this is correct, even though the Hillel calendar, the calculated calendar, was put together in 358 AD. This stipulation for the use of the Hillel 2 calendar, which is what that's called, that calculated calendar, is actually based on the Hillel calendar of Yeshua's day. During Yeshua's day, they were doing calculations and observation. And so, you see, they were not in the land, so they were not able to do observation, so they did the best they could. They created a calculated calendar that kept the Jews all together. In 1948, that made them possible to come together again as a nation, something that has never been done before. Now, this calendar is off by several hours up to one day. But you know what? This is still the calendar that Yeshua used. So the problems with the Hillel 2 calendar serve to highlight the reason that Yeshua must restore the calendar. He's going to be the one to restore all these things. Our arguing over it isn't going to restore it. So Ephraim is going to join Judah. Using Judah's calendar is going to be paramount in this joining. Ephraim must join Judah to keep the feasts when Judah keeps them. Now, what if Judah was wrong all this time? Well, let's go back to Leviticus 4, chapter 13. And if the whole congregation of Israel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which should not be done, and are guilty, when the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the congregation shall offer a young bullock for sin, and bring him before the tabernacle of the congregation. You know, we just came through Yom Kippur, and we understand that that is a national atonement. But here is another national atonement that's outside of the auspices of Yom Kippur. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before the Lord, and the bullock shall be killed before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall bring of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall dip his finger in some of the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, even before the veil. And he shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar which is before the Lord, that is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour out all of the blood at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take all his fat from him, and burn it upon the altar. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a sin offering, so he shall do with this, and the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. It is a sin offering for the congregation. Now, what if what I'm teaching you causes you to sin? Well, first of all, you've got to know that teachers are going to receive a greater judgment. And then I refer you back to what we just read in Leviticus chapter 4, starting at verse 13. Who are we then commanded to reject? Because I'm saying, we need to be in unity. We need to start trying to get along with each other, start coming under the authority of those folks that Yeshua put himself under authority to. But who are we commanded to reject? There are some people in the Commonwealth of Israel that the Lord says don't have anything to do with these people. They get cut off from their people. They get set outside the camp. We're supposed to leave them alone and let them learn their lesson so that they will come back, so they'll repent and not do those things again. You see, when we decide that we're just going to go ahead and talk with them and, we can still be friends, what we're doing is we're not giving them the opportunity to repent and come back. Slanderers. Miriam was set outside the camp. Idolaters. Jehovah killed tens of thousands at each incidence of idolatry. And then we have fornicators. Zimri and Cosbi were killed for their fornication in the tabernacle. Drunkards. Jehovah slew Nadab and Abihu. Adulterers. Adultery comes with an automatic death sentence. And then we have Paul's list. But now I have written to you not to keep company if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator. Okay, look. 1 Corinthians 5:11. Not to keep company. Don't have relationship with them. If any brother be a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, with such an one do not even eat. Okay, so Paul adds covetous, railer, and extortioner into the list. Covetous is somebody that goes around just wanting what everybody else has. A railer is an abusive person, somebody who abuses others. And an extortioner is someone who tries to take people's money through evil schemes. And now what about people who don't know how to say the name properly, don't know how to wear a tsitsiot properly, or have opinions that we disagree with? Well, you have to look at them. Are they making an effort to do the actions and behaviors of Torah? If they are not slandering, fornicating, committing idolatry, being adulterous, and all the other things, then if they are making an effort to keep Torah and they're not doing it exactly the way that we think they should, we have to remember that there are no doctrines, interpretations, or opinions in Torah. There are only actions, and it's our actions that people will see as the fruit of our walk. Doctrinal disputes can be handled through just simply concentrating on their behaviors instead of their opinions, and ascertaining which of the Sanhedrin's decrees pertain to us. You see, if we know somebody is committing sexual sin or idolatry of any kind, then that's their fruit, and we don't have anything to do with them. But if they're just not doing something the way that you think they should, then just, put your mind back on your keeping of the Torah, and don't let what they do upset you. And then, go to look up see what the decrees were. What did the Great Council say, during the time of Yeshua and before that about how to do things? Paul talks about provoking our Jewish brethren to jealousy in Romans 11:14. He also tells us not to become puffed up and self-righteous, thinking that we know more than the Jews because, we have the gospel. What we're to do is to approach our Father's house and our brother Judah. By the way, we saw that in the Prodigal Son, where Ephraim went to the father's house and said, I am not worthy to be in your house. Let me, sleep out here in the barn, basically, with the animals. So we're to approach Ephraim, we're Ephraim, and we have to approach the father's house and our brother Judah with humility, not with arrogance or presumptuousness, as the King James Version calls it, so that Israel and Judah can once again become one olive tree. How will it happen? How will we come together if Ephraim and Judah are keeping the feasts at different times? Because, we're puffed up and we know that the crescent moon is not the right one, and that this is not a calendar of months, and has nothing to do with the moon, and it's not the conjunction, it's something else, and you calculate this over here, and how in the world? This year we have 4 different dates for celebrations. 4. How are we going to be unified with Brother Judah if we keep this up? Well, this is only a first step in the direction of rejoining Judah in the end of days. And as I said before, it's my proposal to you to consider that instead of being defiant toward the very things that have allowed the conception and growth of our remnant movement in the end of days. And by the way, if there was no Israel over there starting in 1948, there would be no Hebrew Roots movement. So if we want to be defiant against Judah and be defiant against the great council that the Lord set up back there in Shoftim in Deuteronomy 17, then we're not going to see the growth of our remnant movement in the end of days. We're just going to see more disputes. So my proposal to you, my heart's cry to you, is to let us join together on these important issues in the way that Yeshua did in his day with those who have made the Hebrew Roots movement possible. I'm talking about the house of Judah. I pray that you will consider these words and that you will be blessed by this teaching. Shalom.